I discovered my husband's infidelity and rebuilt my life. Until my ex tried to run us over in a jealous rage, I've been a silent reader in internet forums for a long time. But today, I finally have my own story to tell. My life has been an absolute chaos for the past year, and although many times I wanted to write about what happened to me, I simply didn't have the time or the energy. But now that everything has been resolved, I feel that sharing my experience could help someone else avoid going through the same thing. Let me introduce myself. My name is Laura, I'm 42 years old, and I was married to a man named Daniel for what I thought would be the rest of my life. But in the end, it was 6 years I'll never get back. Sometimes I told myself that our marriage wasn't that bad. Maybe I clung to the idea that it had been a good decision. When I met him on Facebook, I really believed I'd found the love of my life. Daniel was charismatic, attractive, and fun. My youth was not easy. I grew up in a home where my mother constantly mistreated my father, yelling at him until dawn, throwing things around the house and making him feel worthless. My father never left because he loved us, but I saw the damage in his eyes. So when I started dating Daniel, I promised myself I'd be very careful. I watched every aspect of his behavior for 2 years before we got married. How he handled money, how he treated waiters, how he reacted under stress. And honestly, he passed every test. He was a thoughtful, patient, generous man, the complete opposite of my mother. I convinced myself that I had broken my family's cycle of abuse. We got married in a beautiful ceremony, bought a cozy house in a quiet neighborhood, and started what I hoped would be our happily ever after. I had no idea I was entering a completely different nightmare from the one I experienced in my childhood. The first 2 years were good, but then everything fell apart. We were no longer the couple everyone admired, but the one that had explosive arguments every month, like a clock set to explode. The worst part was that we fought over absurd things, leaving the dishes in the sink, me arriving late from work, him spending too much time with his friends, or even which TV show to watch that night. I didn't want to give up. I still saw in him the man who used to surprise me with weekend getaways and leave love notes in the kitchen. How did we go from that to him yelling at me for buying the wrong brand of coffee? I suggested couples therapy because I'm the kind of person who believes in fixing things before throwing them away. I practically begged him for us to try. We went to only one session, and it was a disaster. The therapist pointed out that we had communication problems and that Daniel had difficulties handling conflict in a healthy way. Instead of reflecting on it, he started crying, accused the therapist of attacking him, and said he would never go back. He insisted the woman was a quack and that I was trying to make him look crazy. Later, I found out all of this coincided with his mother's death, which made me try to be more understanding. Grief changes us all in different ways, but he refused to talk about it or seek help, and his anger just kept growing. The fights at home were so intense that once the neighbors called the police. That night, Daniel was yelling at me because I forgot to pick up his clothes from the dry cleaner. To him, that was a valid reason to make a scene that woke up the entire neighborhood. Over time, we fell into a strange cycle. We slept in the same bed, but behaved like mere roommates who occasionally had intimacy. The passion had faded. We got up, went to work, ate dinner in front of the TV without talking much, and then went to sleep. But despite everything, I was still in love with him. I clung to the idea that with effort we could get back to what we once were. I firmly believed in the promise of for better or for worse in marriage. What I never imagined was that he had already broken his vows long before I did. I work at a marketing company. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it pays well. Part of my responsibilities includes traveling to attend conferences and expos. A year ago, I had to travel to Chicago for a 4-day event. However, on the third day, there was a crisis at the office. Our system crashed and we lost important customer data. Our boss demanded everyone return immediately, so I booked the first flight back, excited to surprise my husband. I wanted our reunion to be something special, like in the movies. On the way from the airport to home, I stopped at a florist and bought a huge bouquet of tulips, his favorites. I also got him his favorite wine and gourmet chocolates. In my head, this was an opportunity to start over, to remind ourselves how much we loved each other. When I arrived home at 2 p.m., I saw his car in the driveway, which made sense because he usually worked from home on Thursdays. Everything seemed normal. However, I noticed small, strange details. Music coming from our bedroom, his favorite playlist, which he only played when he was in a very good mood, and 2 wine glasses in the sink. I thought maybe he'd invited a friend over for lunch. I'd never been more wrong. I went up the stairs with a smile on my face, anticipating his surprise at seeing me. I didn't notice the noises coming from the bedroom until my hand was already on the doorknob. Remember those scenes in horror movies where the protagonist is about to open a door and everyone yells, "Don't do it!" I was that character. What I saw when I opened the door shattered everything I believed about my life. There was Daniel, my husband, the man I had built a home with, rolling around with another woman in our bed. The same bed where we had made promises of eternal love. The same bed where he held me when I had my anxiety crisis last year. My world fell apart in 1 second. The flowers I was holding fell to the floor, and the man, who was with my husband, instead of showing guilt or shame, tried to run away, pushing me as if I were a nightclub bouncer. Without thinking, I grabbed him by the arm and, instead of hitting him, gave him 2 open-handed slaps, like in a soap opera. I don't even know why I didn't punch him. Maybe because he wasn't the real traitor in this story. Daniel, meanwhile, didn't even try to apologize. He just picked up his clothes off the floor like the only thing bothering him was being interrupted. And when he finally looked me in the eyes, the only thing that came out of his mouth was, "Why did you come home so early?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not a, "I'm sorry," not an explanation, not even a pathetic attempt to justify himself. Just that arrogant question, said with annoyance, as if the problem wasn't that I'd found him in bed with someone else, but that I'd arrived unannounced, interrupting his moment of pleasure. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. My mind went blank as I tried to process what I was seeing and hearing. The woman in bed with him, a girl who barely looked 25, was awkwardly covering herself with the sheets, as if that could erase what had just happened. "Why did you come home so early?" Daniel repeated, this time sounding more annoyed. My mouth opened and closed several times, but the words wouldn't come out. Rage, disbelief, sadness, it all swirled inside me like a hurricane. I looked at the floor where the tulips I had bought with so much anticipation were now trampled, crushed under the feet of that stranger who had run away with no dignity. "Why am I here early?" I repeated in a whisper, more to myself than to him. My gaze fell on the nightstand, where our wedding photo was still framed, the same one where he held me tightly and promised me eternal love. The irony of that scene hit me so hard I almost laughed. But instead of laughing, something inside me just turned off. Daniel sighed as if this situation were just a minor inconvenience in his day. He got out of bed with a calmness that made my stomach churn and started getting dressed without any rush. "Laura, let's not make a scene, okay?" he said in a tired tone while pulling up his pants. "It's not what it looks like." I remained in shock. It's not what it looks like. The most cliché and stupid phrase he could have said right then. It's not what it looks like? My voice trembled, not from sadness, but from contained fury. "Then explain, Daniel. Exactly what does it look like? Because from where I stand, it looks like I just found my husband naked in our bed with another woman. The girl in the bed was watching this scene with wide eyes, visibly uncomfortable. Without saying a word, she hastily picked up her clothes and left the room, not even having the decency to look me in the eye. Daniel, on the other hand, ran his hands through his hair and snorted. "Look, Laura, this was going to come out eventually." I blinked. "What?" "We haven't been doing well. You know that." "It hasn't been the same for a long time," he said with a shrug, as if he were explaining why he decided to switch supermarkets and not why he destroyed our marriage. "I don't know what you expected, but the truth is—" He stopped for a moment and looked me straight in the eyes. "You're also to blame." My blood ran cold. "Excuse me?" "Yes, Laura. You're also responsible for this happening." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. At that moment, I realized I had been married to a man who would never take responsibility for his actions. A man who, even at that moment, was trying to blame me for his betrayal. "I can't believe you're saying this," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. "If you had been more understanding, if you hadn't insisted so much on therapy, if you had been more receptive in bed." There it was, the justification for everything. It wasn't that he had consciously decided to cheat on me. It was my fault for not being enough for him. Rage clouded my vision. "Are you telling me you slept with another woman because I didn't please you enough?" My tone was so low and controlled that it even scared me. Daniel folded his arms. "I have needs, Laura. You knew that. I tried to do it the right way when I suggested an open marriage, but you refused." I let out a bitter laugh. "So because I didn't want other people involved in our marriage, you decided to do whatever you wanted without my consent." "I tried to do it without hurting you," he insisted, as if that were a valid argument. "I never wanted you to find out like this, but, well, you came home early. I wanted to scream, wanted to destroy everything around me, but instead, I just stayed quiet. And in that silence, something clicked inside me. I realized he wasn't worth wasting another tear on." "I want a divorce," I said suddenly. He blinked in surprise, as if he hadn't expected me to decide so quickly. "Really? You're not even going to talk about it?" "Talk about what, Daniel?" I laughed grimly. "How exactly do you justify the unjustifiable? How do you convince me that this betrayal wasn't really a betrayal?" He didn't respond. He just looked at me with a mix of surprise and annoyance. "I'm going to pack my things," I said, heading to the closet, "and I expect you to be gone when I get back." "Laura, you don't have to do this so dramatically." "Oh, believe me, Daniel, I'm being far less dramatic than you deserve." I took a suitcase and started putting my things in it without looking at him. I don't know how long I spent in there, but when I came out of the room, Daniel was still in the living room with his arms crossed, looking annoyed. I didn't stop. I didn't look at him. I simply walked out of the house we had bought together and closed the door behind me. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind replaying every moment, every detail, every lie disguised as love. When I finally stopped, I realized I was at my best friend Patricia's apartment. When she opened the door and saw me, with my suitcase in one hand and eyes filled with pent-up anger, she didn't ask questions. She just hugged me and let me in. That night, between glasses of wine and silent tears, I knew my life was about to change forever. What I didn't know at that moment was that things were far from over, because Daniel wasn't going to let me go that easily, and the worst was yet to come. I felt my blood boiling. I couldn't believe what was happening. My husband, the man I had shared 6 years of my life with, was naked in our bed with someone else, and all he could do was ask why I arrived early, as if this were all my fault, as if I had ruined his moment. For an instant, I was paralyzed, trying to process the situation. My heart was pounding so hard that I could barely hear the music still playing in the background. I saw Daniel's expression, not guilt or remorse, but annoyance. Annoyance that I was there, that my unexpected arrival had interrupted his fun. I looked at the woman he was with. I didn't recognize her, but it didn't matter. Her tangled hair and the way she hurried to get dressed while avoiding my gaze said it all. She didn't even bother to apologize. To her, I was just an uncomfortable obstacle in her adventure. I felt a lump in my throat. My body trembled, and for a moment, I thought I was going to throw up. My mind filled with memories. The times he told me he had to stay late at work. The nights he claimed to be too tired to be with me. The times he went out with friends and came back smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. Suddenly, everything fit together like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I took a deep breath and, in the steadiest voice I could find, I asked, "How long has this been going on?" Daniel didn't even pretend not to understand me. He shrugged and looked away as if the answer didn't matter. "I don't know. A few months. A few months." My stomach churned. So while I was trying to save our marriage, looking for solutions, trying to find a way to reconnect with him, he had already made his choice. I was alone in that fight, and he simply lied, cheated, looked me in the eye every day with that damn fake smile, knowing he had someone else. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "Were you ever going to tell me at some point?" His jaw tensed. "I don't know, Laura. This just happened." "Oh, of course. Because affairs just happen. As if you accidentally trip and fall into bed with someone else. As if it were an innocent mistake, an unfortunate coincidence." "You're unbelievable," I whispered more to myself than to him. I picked up the flowers that were still on the floor, now trampled and destroyed. I looked at them for a moment, thinking how they perfectly represented what had just happened. They had been beautiful, vibrant, a gesture of love and hope. Now they were just a pile of crushed, lifeless petals. I threw them onto the bed, right where he'd been with his lover. I hoped they were worth it. I turned around and left the room, ignoring the way he called out to me. I had nothing else to say. I went down the stairs quickly, feeling my breath become erratic. All I wanted was to get out of that house, that place that was no longer my home, but the scene of the worst betrayal of my life. I grabbed my purse, my keys, and went out into the street without looking back. I got into my car and drove without any direction. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay there. The pain in my chest was unbearable, like someone had reached inside my body and was squeezing my heart with all their might. I ended up at my best friend Patricia's house. As soon as she opened the door and saw my face, she knew something was terribly wrong. Without saying a word, she hugged me tightly, and that's when I finally broke down. I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried in years. Patricia didn't ask questions. She just took me to the couch and let me get it all out. She brought me a glass of water, sat next to me, and waited patiently for me to speak. When I finally gathered the strength to tell her everything, she was silent for a moment. Then, with the most serious expression I'd ever seen on her, she said, "That jerk doesn't deserve a single tear from you." Her tone was so firm that for a moment I felt ashamed for having cried so much over him. "I'm going to divorce him," I said, though at that moment the words felt unreal. I never thought I'd have to say that. I never imagined my marriage would end like that. Patricia nodded. "And I'm going to help you with anything you need." And she did. The following weeks were a whirlwind of lawyers, documents, and endless arguments with Daniel, who, somehow, still had the nerve to act like he was the victim in all this. He wanted to negotiate the divorce terms as if it were a business deal. But I wasn't going to budge. I got an excellent lawyer, gathered all the evidence I needed, and made sure he wouldn't benefit after destroying my life. The hardest part was facing him during the hearings. Seeing him sitting there with that same arrogant attitude, as if nothing he did was really his fault. But every time I felt rage consuming me, I reminded myself that I was doing the right thing, that I was fighting for my freedom, for my dignity. The process was long and exhausting, but in the end, I walked away from that marriage with my head held high. The day I signed the papers, I felt a strange mix of emotions. On the one hand, I was devastated. 6 years of my life wasted on a man who didn't deserve it. But on the other hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. It was over. My new life was beginning, and although I still had wounds to heal, I knew that one day I would be happy again. What I didn't know at the time was that my story with Daniel wasn't over yet. I had no idea that months later he would do something so dangerous and terrifying that it would change my life forever. But that is another story. I decided that instead of getting lost in dating apps or checking my lawyer's emails for the 100th time, I'd go to a little independent bookstore downtown on a Saturday afternoon. It was a cozy place, with cats sleeping in the window displays, wooden floors that creaked with every step, and that unmistakable smell of old books. Standing in the science fiction section, I realized the entire genre had changed while I was busy trying to save my marriage. I looked at the titles in confusion. They were huge, part of endless sagas, with names I could barely pronounce. Then I heard a soft laugh beside me. It wasn't mocking, but rather amused. I turned and saw a woman with a friendly smile holding a book so big it could have been used as a weapon. "Need help?" she asked casually. I explained that I'd been out of the sci-fi loop for years and didn't know where to start. Before I knew it, we were sitting in a corner of the bookstore, and she was giving me an intensive lesson on the best contemporary novels in the genre. Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm when she talked about her favorite books, and she had a habit of tucking her hair behind her ear whenever she got excited about a story. What began as a simple book recommendation turned into a 2-hour conversation about everything, from classic novels to multiverse theories. For the first time in months, I had a meaningful conversation with no lawyers, no divorce papers, and no awkward attempts at flirting through text messages. For a moment, I forgot about Carolyn and all the chaos I'd left behind. When it was time to leave, I mustered the courage to ask for her number. I felt like a teenager again, my hand shaking as I saved it on my phone. It was ridiculous for a 42-year-old man to feel that way, but there was something about Emma, because that was her name, that made me feel alive again. I left the bookstore with her number, a recommendation for the 3-body problem, and, most importantly, the first genuine smile I'd had in months. That night, while we exchanged messages, I realized how different it felt to talk to her compared to the empty conversations on dating apps. There was something real in our connection. I knew that, on our first official date, I had to be honest about my ongoing divorce. When I finally mentioned it, expecting her reaction to be discomfort or rejection, Emma simply took a sip of her wine and said, "Thanks for being honest. We all have baggage. What's important is knowing how to handle it." That's simple. No judgment, no weird looks, no clumsy attempts to change the subject. She even joked that at least she knew she wasn't secretly dating a married man. Emma was the complete opposite of Carolyn. While Carolyn shouted during arguments, Emma explained calmly. While Carolyn demanded attention, Emma gave it freely. She was genuinely interested in my work, remembered details from conversations we'd had weeks before, and never made me feel guilty for being in the middle of a complicated divorce. After 5 months of dating Emma, I was completely in love. She'd send me book recommendations at work, leave little notes inside the ones she lent me, and always listened intently. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just pretending to be okay. I really was. But of course, just when I was starting to feel happy again, everything spun out of control. That afternoon, Emma and I had spent a wonderful Saturday together. After having lunch at a little cafe, we headed to her car in the mall parking lot, discussing which movie we'd watch that night. I remember laughing at something she said when, all of a sudden, everything turned into chaos. First, I heard the roar of an engine accelerating. I turned instinctively and saw a car speeding straight toward us, right at Emma. Without thinking, I grabbed her arm to pull her away, but I wasn't fast enough. The car struck her leg, knocking her down with a heart-wrenching scream. I'll never forget the sound of her bone breaking. I knelt beside her as she cried out in pain, my heart pounding uncontrollably. I was about to call 911 when I heard the screech of tires again. The car was reversing. It wasn't an accident. The driver was trying to hit us again. Fear shot through me like lightning. I saw Emma's face twisted in pain and knew that if I didn't move her, the driver would kill both of us. Emma screamed with every movement as I dragged her between two parked cars. The car surged forward again, crashing into the cars we were hiding between. The force of the impact set off all the alarms. People started yelling and running toward us, phones recording. And then, the car door opened. There she was, Carolyn. She got out of the car with the same confident posture as always, as if she hadn't just tried to kill us in broad daylight. Her hair was perfectly styled. She wore the same blazer she used for work, and she had a look of madness in her eyes unlike anything I'd seen before. This was not the woman I had married, not even the woman I'd found in our bed with someone else. This was something else, something monstrous. My mind struggled to process what had just happened. Carolyn had followed us, stalked us, and waited for the perfect moment to attack. It wasn't a fit of passion. It was premeditated. She was approaching us, her heels clicking on the pavement like a ticking clock. But before she could reach us, a huge man grabbed her by the arms. She fought like a wild animal, trying to break free, but couldn't. The police arrived soon after. Emma was sobbing beside me when the paramedics arrived. I could hardly process what was happening when I saw Carolyn, handcuffed, screaming like a madwoman. "It's only been a year, and you're already with her?" The nerve. The woman who cheated on me in our bed had the audacity to act like the victim. Later, I found out it was all caught on the mall's security cameras. From the way she stalked us to how she checked her makeup in the mirror before ramming us with the car. Everything was documented. Carolyn was found guilty of attempted murder and sentenced to 12 years in prison. 12 years. Less than she deserved, but at least it was something. After the trial, the divorce was finalized quickly. Attempting to murder your ex invalidates any right to alimony or shared property, so the judge granted her exactly what she had before the marriage. Nothing. Emma, after months of recovery, is completely fine. We're still together, happy, and planning to get married next spring. Sometimes I wonder if there were warning signs I missed. But the truth is, madness doesn't always come with a neon sign. Sometimes it just runs you over in a parking lot. At least now I know what to look out for. And, just in case, Emma and I both make sure to have concealed carry permits. You never know when a ghost from the past might try to come back. While the paramedics treated Emma and the police secured the scene, I was still frozen, watching Carolyn struggle with the officers as if she still didn't understand the gravity of what she'd done. The mall parking lot was utter chaos. Some people looked on in horror, others recorded with their phones, and the sound of sirens mixed with the murmurs of the crowd. I couldn't get the image of Emma on the ground out of my head, her face pale with pain, her leg at an impossible angle. Even so, in the midst of all that, Carolyn was glaring at me like I was the one to blame. A police officer asked for my statement. I could barely process my thoughts, but I told them what happened as best I could. I explained who Carolyn was, how she'd been delaying our divorce for months, and how she had just tried to kill me and my girlfriend in broad daylight. Carolyn, still handcuffed, started screaming. "It's his fault," she shrieked, her eyes wild. "If he hadn't betrayed me, none of this would have happened." One of the officers told her to be quiet, but her hateful glare remained fixed on me. I couldn't believe it. In her twisted mind, she was still the victim. When Emma was lifted into the ambulance, I rushed to take her hand. "I'm going with you," I said, not letting go. Emma nodded weakly, and I saw her attempt a smile despite her pain. "I guess we'll have to postpone our movie tonight," she murmured. I couldn't help but laugh, even though my eyes burned with unshed tears. "Yes, I guess we will." The ambulance sped off, sirens blaring, leaving me feeling like the world around me moved in slow motion. The hospital was another nightmare. Hours of waiting, doctors coming in and out, the constant sound of monitors and rolling gurneys in the hallways. I sat in the waiting room, my clothes stained with Emma's blood, unable to do anything but pray she'd be all right. When a doctor finally came out to talk to me, I felt my heart might burst. "Your girlfriend suffered a serious fracture of the tibia and fibula," he said in a professional but reassuring tone. "The surgery was successful, but she'll need months of recovery and physical therapy." I let out a sigh of relief. I didn't care how long her recovery took. I just needed her to be okay. When I was finally allowed to see her, Emma lay in the hospital bed, her leg completely bandaged, looking exhausted but undefeated. "Well, this was a date to remember," she joked, though her voice was still laced with pain. "Definitely not what I had planned," I answered, sitting by her side. "But you're alive, and that's all that matters." I sat next to her and carefully took her hand, running my fingers over her knuckles as if I needed to confirm she was really there, that this wasn't a nightmare. "Carolyn's in custody," I assured her. "She won't be able to hurt you again." Emma nodded, then looked at me seriously. "How are you?" That question caught me off guard. During the last few hours, all my attention had been on Emma, on making sure she was okay. But now that she asked, I felt a tidal wave of emotions hit me at once. Rage, sadness, confusion. "I don't know," I finally admitted. "I don't know how to process the fact that the woman I was married to tried to kill us." Emma gently squeezed my hand. "Don't let it consume you," she whispered. "She's not worth it." That was when I realized why I loved her so much. Despite everything we'd been through, all the pain and trauma, she remained the strongest, most compassionate person I'd ever known. I stayed with her that night in the hospital. I couldn't imagine leaving her alone after what had happened. And though I was exhausted, I hardly slept. I spent most of the night watching her breathe, making sure she was okay. The next day, the story was already spreading online. The video of Carolyn attacking us in the parking lot had gone viral. The headlines were shocking. "Woman tries to run over her ex and his new partner in a brutal act of jealousy." "Attempted murder in broad daylight. Enraged ex-wife arrested after horrifying attack." I couldn't help reading the comments on forums and social media. People speculated about what drove her to do something like that. Some made jokes about scorned women going too far, and others suggested I should have seen the signs before. But there were no signs. There was no warning that the woman I'd shared 6 years of my life with would become someone capable of trying to kill me. Meanwhile, the police and prosecutors were building the case against Carolyn. They contacted me several times for additional statements, and although reliving it over and over was exhausting, I knew it was necessary. On the day of the trial, when I saw her enter the courtroom in handcuffs, something inside me shuddered. She no longer looked like the elegant, confident woman I had known. Her hair was disheveled, her gaze cold and vacant. When the judge read the charges against her, attempted first-degree murder, assault with a deadly weapon, among others, I saw her close her eyes for a moment. But when she looked at me and saw Emma by my side, her face twisted with contempt. She showed no remorse. During the trial, the prosecutors presented all the evidence against her. The security footage, witness testimonies, text messages she had sent before the attack. Her attorney tried to argue she had acted in a moment of insanity, that she didn't intend to harm us that severely. But the videos told another story. Carolyn had followed us, waited for the perfect moment, and then tried to kill us. There was nothing impulsive about it. After days of testimony and deliberations, the verdict was clear: guilty on all counts. When the judge announced her sentence, 12 years in prison with no parole before 10, I felt a mixture of relief and frustration. 12 years didn't seem enough for what she'd done, but at least for a decade, I wouldn't have to worry about her showing up at my door. After the trial, the divorce went through quickly. Carolyn lost any right to our shared assets or any kind of alimony. Life went on. Emma fully recovered after months of physical therapy. She became stronger, and so did I. We moved in together to an apartment in the city center, far from the memories of my old life. And finally, after all the chaos, I started to feel truly free. Emma and I still visit the bookstore where we met, and every time we go through a crowded parking lot, she jokes, "Maybe we should park somewhere else. I don't want to tempt fate." We laugh together because we know that after everything we've been through, nothing can stop us. And this time I know my story has a happy ending. During the following weeks, I still couldn't believe everything that had happened. Even though Carolyn was behind bars and Emma was out of danger, the impact of the attack still hung over us like a constant shadow. I kept replaying the parking lot moment in my head over and over. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the car speeding toward us, heard Emma's scream, felt the desperation of dragging her away from the path of impact. Emma's recovery was long and painful. Although the doctors said her surgery was successful, she needed months of physiotherapy to regain full mobility in her leg. I made sure to be with her for each session, supporting her every step of the way. It didn't matter if it meant rushing out of work or sleeping in an uncomfortable chair at her place when the pain wouldn't let her rest. "You don't have to do all this, you know?" she said one night while I adjusted a pillow under her leg. "Yes, I do," I replied without hesitation. The truth was, it wasn't even about obligation. It was about love. Emma was the person who had given me back my life after years of an unhappy marriage, and if there was anything I could do to ease her pain, I would do it without a second thought. Despite everything, she kept her sense of humor. Well, at least now I have a legitimate excuse not to run marathons. I laughed, but it hurt me to see her like that. What bothered me the most was knowing all of this was caused by a woman I once thought I loved. Meanwhile, Carolyn kept trying to manipulate the narrative even from prison. I learned she'd been calling some of our old mutual friends, telling them a distorted version of events. According to her, the attack had been just an accident, and she'd been treated unfairly. She's saying she didn't try to kill us, Emma told me one day, holding her phone, that she just lost control of the car. I laughed without humor. Lost control of the car? Twice? It was astounding how she continued denying reality, even with all the evidence against her. I didn't expect her to admit her guilt, but I was surprised at how far she was willing to go to manipulate the story. Luckily, most people didn't believe her. The evidence was too strong. Plus, her reputation had been publicly destroyed after the trial. The internet was filled with articles and videos analyzing the case, and her name was now forever linked to attempted murder in every Google search. "I think we should celebrate," Emma said one night while we were watching a movie. "Celebrate what?" "That we're alive. That the nightmare is over." I looked at her and knew she was right. We'd been through hell, but we had come out stronger. So we planned a weekend getaway at a cabin in the mountains. We needed to get away from everything, breathe fresh air, and remember what it felt like to live without fear. The trip was incredible. We spent our days exploring trails, cooking together, and talking about everything we'd been through. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd end up here with you after all that, I wouldn't have believed it, I said as we watched the sunset from the porch. Emma smiled and laid her head on my shoulder. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns, but in the end, I think everything happens for a reason. And for the first time in a long time, I felt she was right. When we returned from our trip, I realized something inside me had changed. I no longer felt that constant tension in my chest every time I thought about Carolyn. The fear had been replaced by a sense of closure. My life with her was part of the past, and my future was with Emma. Months went by, and little by little, things returned to normal. Emma fully regained mobility in her leg. I focused on my job, and we finally felt the shadow of Carolyn had vanished completely. But then, one morning, I got a letter from prison. The envelope had my name in Carolyn's handwriting. I held it in my hands for several minutes, unsure whether to open it or just throw it away. In the end, curiosity won. The letter was long. I didn't expect her to apologize, but she did. Or at least, she tried. "I don't know what happened to me. I don't know what I became. But I want you to know I'm sorry." I read every word with skepticism. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I do hope that someday you can understand that I never wanted it all to end this way." I sighed and put the letter on the table. Carolyn had always been an expert manipulator. I couldn't tell if her words were genuine or if she was just trying to find some sort of redemption. I didn't respond. There was no point. I knew she was paying the price for her actions and that in a few years she'd be out of prison. But I also knew that when that day came, I would still be moving on with my life without her. Emma and I continued with our plans. We got engaged and started planning our wedding. It was something simple, without much protocol, just with the people closest to us. On the day of the ceremony, as Emma walked toward me in her white dress, I knew everything that had happened before was worth it. Every tear, every moment of anguish, every nightmare. It had all led me to this moment. Carolyn was just a closed chapter in my story, and Emma was my new beginning. Months later, I got a text from an unknown number. It was from an old friend who still had contact with Carolyn. "Just thought you should know. Carolyn got out of prison earlier than expected for good behavior. Not sure if she'll try to contact you, but be careful." I stared at the message on my phone, a chill running down my spine. Emma noticed my expression and came over to me. "Everything okay?" I deleted the message without replying and smiled at her. "Yes, everything's fine." And for the first time in a long time, I really believed it. Several days went by after receiving the message about Carolyn's release, but I couldn't get it out of my head. No matter how much I tried to tell myself there was no reason to worry, that she no longer had power over me, that our story was in the past. Something in me still felt a twinge of anxiety whenever I looked at my phone, worried I'd see her name on the screen. But weeks passed, and nothing happened. No calls, no letters, nothing. Slowly, I started to relax. Maybe, after all, Carolyn had decided to move on with her life. Maybe her time in prison really had changed her. Or maybe she just found someone else to focus her anger on. Either way, I didn't want to waste my energy on her anymore. Emma and I focused on our new life together. We traveled, explored new bookstores, and kept up our little traditions, like leaving notes in the books we lent each other. We moved into a bigger house with a small garden where Emma started growing herbs and flowers. It was a peaceful life, a happy life. And on one of those afternoons while we were sitting on the porch watching the sun go down, Emma rested her head on my shoulder and said, "I think we can finally say all of this is behind us." I smiled and kissed her forehead. Yes, finally. Because at that moment I realized it was true. The past no longer had any hold over me. Carolyn was just a story that once happened, but no longer defined my life. What mattered was the present. What mattered was Emma. And with that, I finally closed that chapter of my life. Forever.